What kind of brush do you use? If this question annoys you, then this video is for you because I'm going to be taking the most basic brush and paint a realistic painting with just one default brush to show that even though custom brushes can be great and very helpful sometimes, they can also be a huge crutch for many and only mask your weaknesses and stop your learning. Those that know how to paint knows when someone doesn't know something and knows when somebody is trying to hide something because we've been through it. And these things can rarely be hidden by fancy brushes and adjustment layers. So in this video, I want to challenge myself to not use any adjustment layers or blend modes as well to make things even more challenging, just straight painting. And I really challenge you to do this as well because you will see, wow, even though I'm not using any of the custom brushes that I'm used to, I'm still making a pretty darn decent painting. Or you might see, wow, I really depend on my custom brushes. And maybe I should spend some time on the fundamentals. Because many times when we are painting from a subject, we will analyze that subject. We're not just painting that particular tone over there, this particular angle over there. We're making sense of it all. You know, I'm not just copying, I'm understanding where the light is coming from. And this really roots into my regular job because many times I'm asked to create things that don't exist. A monster from outer space, a creature from a lab, mutants and things like that, elves. Well, how do you paint something that isn't there? How do you paint something out of your imagination? You have to understand how life works, how we see it, the fundamentals, and a bunch of other things. So in this video, I wanted to really talk about many of the core fundamentals, not just in art and how we see things, but in Photoshop as well and all sorts of other things. So first big, huge fundamental is the ability to visualize. Now, many of us might think, yeah, I know how to visualize. I know how to visualize. Well, you probably also know what Mickey Mouse looks like. Close your eyes and try to really picture Mickey. Try to picture the lines, try to picture the buttons on his shorts, everything. Can you see the lines or are you seeing fuzziness? Because that's what I'm talking about. Visualizing things can become more and more clear. I can't think of any other ways to think that are as powerful as visualizing. Because actually visualizing, you can kind of apply that to all the different ways of thinking as well. You can visualize structure. You can visualize lighting, color, in steps, in time. When I would sketch on the subways and do caricatures of random people, I didn't want them to get freaked out or weirded out by me staring at them, so I'd only take just subtle glances. And that helped me to really strengthen my ability to visualize things at a glance. And then when I became really interested in caricatures, I started to caricature everybody. And many of the caricature artists know this. When they stare at a face, many times we are stretching and pulling different parts of their features. I first start off with the head and I start to mold it into these various different simplified shapes and see, does it match? Does it match? Does it match? Bing, this one matches. And I keep going forward with that. What kind of eyes should she have? Big ones, small ones. And I start to go through all these different options. I start to visualize them within the basic shape that I just started off with, and so on and so forth. So this is visualizing with a reference, but not trying to visualize the actual reference, trying to capture the essence of the reference, trying to put down something that really feels like that person. But if you put a tracing paper over top, it wouldn't match. And that's another way to visualize. And there's so many more. Let's talk about the fundamentals of digital painting. You know, how to use your brush. That's probably a really great fundamental here. I don't think I would have been able to do this painting without understanding how to use my brush, right? Because I am using the default brush that pretty much everybody else starts off with. It's not nearly as much about the tool as it is about the person holding the tool. And what are they thinking? How well do they use that tool? And a lot of times that depends on what are they thinking. Some other fundamentals that I really recommend for everybody that likes digital painting is learn the shortcuts. Because as you're painting, you want to have some flow to it. You want to have the ability to just paint. You don't want to have to go up to the menu and click down and click this, click that, click this, and then get your function and then, okay, where am I? Okay, I got to do this now. I got to do this. You know, you don't want that kind of chunky flow. I like to picture it like I'm going down the freeway. I want to go down the freeway nice and smoothly. I don't want stop and go traffic. right? That's not going to create a smooth ride. And that's exactly what we're trying to do for people. We're trying to give them a nice smooth ride as they're painting. So get to know the shortcuts that you constantly use. Get into the habit of constantly looking up that shortcut, then clicking on that shortcut until sooner or later you're using these shortcuts all the time. You could also program your shortcuts into your Wacom pen and tablet. A lot of tablets, they have buttons. A lot of Cintiqs have these remote controls with a million buttons. Start to program those buttons. Start to program the buttons on your pen. You can program specifically for certain programs like Photoshop so that your pen will still have the same shortcuts once you leave Photoshop. Another fundamental of digital painting that I feel like you should know if you want to take digital painting seriously is understanding brush settings. I'm using a default brush and I don't have a lot of the fancy settings. I stripped them all away, but it's still very effective for me because I understand these settings. I understand why they're there, how to manipulate them, how to use them for exactly what I want them to be used for. Typing without looking. That's another huge one. Probably the most helpful class I ever took in high school was keyboarding class. You would just practice how to type without looking at your fingers. On most keyboards, there's two little keys in just approximately the middle of the keyboard. On English keyboards, it's F and J. They usually have a tiny, tiny little bump on the button so that you could feel it with your index finger. Many times I'll use this to find my way back to the correct hand position. Most of the time it's just one hand, right? Because you don't want to constantly look at your keyboard. Because I'm right-handed, so I want my left hand to be on the keyboard. Finds that F button and it knows exactly where it is. And now I can press buttons without looking at my keyboard. And lastly, I think blend modes, even though I'm not using them in this painting, I do feel like they are extremely important, and perhaps I should do a video in the future about blend modes. But blend modes, adjustment layers, I kind of ball them up into one little group there because adjustment layers use blend modes. But understanding how the different blend modes work and which ones are more important for you can absolutely create giant shortcuts in your painting flow. Now, there will be many other fundamentals of digital painting because everybody's different. These are mine. I would love to know yours. You could put them in the comments. But the other thing is that I understand the fundamentals of painting, lighting, structure, color, these kind of things. So I want to talk about these as well. And yeah, these are fundamentals for me. If you're used to creating architecture, if you're used to doing hard-bodied surfaces of vehicles and all this stuff, then you'll have a different set of fundamentals. But many of them will stay exactly the same. I want to start off with structure. That's the first big fundamental. The ability to create things that feel three-dimensional, if you want. I definitely remember there was a point in my life where I was just staring at the page, drawing after drawing, trying to make something feel actually three-dimensional. That's when I discovered the power of visualizing, because that's exactly what I did. I would just stare at that page and I'd try to move my pencil a little slower. And as I'm moving it, I would stop a lot of times. I would try to visualize this thing in there. Notice I said the word in there, because I'm noticing that myself. And that's because that's exactly what I was doing. I wasn't trying to imagine a three-dimensional form on my piece of paper. I was literally trying to imagine a three-dimensional form in my paper. Like as if my paper was a window to another dimension and there's an object in that dimension. I also remember struggling for a couple weeks before I could make anything that felt even close to three-dimensional. Like truly, truly three-dimensional. And then one day, it kind of felt three-dimensional to me. And then it disappeared. I couldn't get those drawings back to feel three-dimensional. But I kept trying and trying and trying. And 2 weeks later, another day, another good drawing day. I was drawing things and I was like, yeah, it kind of feels three-dimensional to me. Awesome. And then I lost it again. And I tried. And I came back, then a couple more gaps and more consistently until I was able to visualize things with structure, much more on demand. After I could start to visualize structure, I tried to start to visualize lighting. And just like in this video, I gave myself a handicap because then I can really isolate those particular ways to think. Right? They're not being helped by other ways to think that I'm better at. So I'd stop drawing lines. And I would only draw patches of tone. So of course my paintings, they look like crap in the beginning. But then I just kept going and going and going, and then one day kind of looked like something. Then I lost it again for another 2 weeks, and then I came back And then I lost it again and it came back, 5 days later, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of how I've experienced it. In the beginning, it might feel like, what am I even doing? How do I visualize structure? To me, it was like the equivalent of, how would you move a pencil with your mind? You would kind of just stare at it and like, just try to move it. Try to picture it moving. Try to move this thing. And that's exactly what I was kind of doing. And it's very similar to how I was thinking. I would stare at the page. I try to visualize it. Visualize that thing on my page. If it doesn't really work that well, maybe I'll throw down just a very simple line, very lightly, because contrast will destroy your ability to visualize. Once there's really high contrast, the ability to visualize anything else there that isn't actually there right now, it diminishes tremendously. We've all had that experience of looking at a blank page, having an amazing idea. It's so clear in your head. You start to put down some lines. You start to put some more lines down. You have about 10 lines now, and you can visualize that initial idea maybe 50% now. You put down 10 more lines and your ability to visualize that initial idea has reduced to like maybe 3 or 4%. But we can increase this as long as you keep practicing. People like Kim Jung-gi, I actually asked him before, how much are you actually visualizing here? Do you see actual lines? How much percentage would you say you see? And he said, if it's a letter-sized piece of paper, he can visualize like 90% of the drawing that he's about to draw. Here's another little tidbit of information. The taxi drivers in London, England, they all know thousands of streets. Not only that, but they pieced it together with structure, right? In an internal map in their heads of how to get to certain places. And many of these streets, they're not straight. It's not a nice grid formation. Many of them wind in and out in all sorts of ways, different sizes and all sorts. Now, is it that driving a taxi in London really, really interests a lot of people that have extremely large capacities to memorize streets and geography? I doubt it. They all train, and then they have to take grueling tests, I hear, that are very difficult to see if they actually memorize those thousands of streets. That to me was the absolute proof that you can strengthen your ability to visualize. You can strengthen the ability to think in almost every way. It's also like muscles. You can exercise them to get better. Now, before we go on any further, here's a couple important questions. Did you subscribe to my channel? If not, make sure you do. That way you'll be able to find your way back to my channel because I'll be making a ton of new videos regularly. I also have a free painting group that I do live streams with on this channel every Monday and Thursday right here. Also, have a question of something you'd like for me to cover in future videos? Put them in the comments. I read them. Have something you'd like for me to paint? Put them in the comments. I read them. And I'm always looking for great new subjects to cover. Animals, people, shows, anything. Then share this video because my goal is to help as many people as I can with this video. And with your help, we can put some perspective on the question, what kind of brush do you use? Doing this will help YouTube know that this is a decent video that people should check out. So that's my little rant for today. Custom brushes do help, but they're not the be-all end-all. The real core to learning how to paint well is in the fundamentals. Now, if you're interested in learning the digital painting fundamentals, I would highly recommend my class on schoolism.com. My class doesn't just teach you what the digital painting fundamentals are. I really let you get inside my head and I really explain all the thinking involved behind the brush. As of this video, we currently have our huge Schoolism winter sale, where you save $100 off a 1-year subscription. So instead of paying $300 for an annual subscription to Schoolism, you can get an entire year of education for $198.